The silent years Lena sat in her chair near the window, watching the cargo ships pass above the colony skies. 10 years had passed, yet the memory of that one day still clung to her like a shadow. It had been a routine mining mission on the outer belt. One wrong calculation, one broken pipe, and her ship had gone spinning into the rocks. She woke up in a cold med bay with a broken spine and a future that no longer belonged to her. The doctors told her she was lucky to be alive. She smiled when they said that, but only because she didn't want to cry again. After a few months, they transferred her to a rehabilitation center on Colony IX-7. It was quiet. Too quiet for someone who once raced through asteroid fields and danced in zero gravity. The place was clean, the nurses kind, but time moved like frozen air. People came and went, some healed and left. Some gave up and disappeared. Lena remained. In the early years, she kept hope alive. She believed technology would catch up. She believed her name, once known in the deep space exploration circles, would still open doors. But the galaxy had other priorities. Giant corporations focused on war tech and planetary defense. No one had time for broken explorers with damaged nerves and forgotten dreams. She applied for surgical trials. Each time she was denied. Too risky. Too expensive. Not worth the investment. The messages came with fancy words, but all she heard was no. She learned to keep herself busy. Books became her friends. She read stories of old Earth, of great wars, and of heroes who rose from nothing. She tried writing her own stories, but often left them unfinished. Her hands worked fine, but her heart did not know where to go. Sometimes, she would sit in silence for hours, just staring at the metal trees outside. They were artificial, built for air recycling, but they looked almost real. She liked them more than people. One day, while the center was half asleep in its usual slow rhythm, a new visitor arrived. He walked without making much sound, carrying a small bag over his shoulder. The receptionist barely looked up. Visitors weren't rare, but they weren't common either. Lena didn't notice him at first. She was in the back garden, watching birds flying near the fence. They were drones programmed to mimic real ones. She knew their patterns by now. The same flight loop every 10 minutes. Then she heard a voice behind her. Calm, clear, and not familiar. It said her name. She turned her chair slightly and saw the man standing a few feet away. He looked young but tired, like someone who had worked through too many nights. His clothes were simple, his face unreadable, but there was something steady in his eyes. He introduced himself as Mark. Just Mark. No title, no ranks, just a name. She asked why he was there. He said he had come for her. She almost laughed. People didn't come for her. Not anymore. He didn't seem offended. He said he had followed her story for years. He knew about the accident. He knew about the rejected applications. He even knew which company had once used her image in a recruitment ad. She felt a strange mix of curiosity and caution. How did this man know so much about her? He told her he was an engineer, not a famous one, not part of any big lab or project. Just someone who believed that broken things could be fixed. His words were plain, but they carried weight. He said he had built something that might help her walk again. She froze. She had heard this before. Promises wrapped in hope. Every time she let herself believe, it hurt more when it failed. But he didn't promise success. He didn't even ask her to trust him. He simply opened his bag and took out a small device. It looked like part of a leg brace, but far more advanced. Lightweight metal, small fiber ports, and something glowing faintly at the core. He explained how it worked. Neural-linked exosupport. It didn't replace her legs. It connected to her nerves, supported the signals, and moved with her thoughts. It sounded like something from an old sci-fi movie, and yet the piece in his hands looked real. She asked why he was offering it to her. He said because no one else would. He said because he believed she deserved the chance. She didn't reply. For a long time. Her eyes stayed on the brace. Her fingers tightened slightly on the arms of her chair. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to say yes. But years of silence had built walls inside her. He didn't push. He left the device with her and said he would return in a few days. If she wanted to try, he would be ready. If not, he would understand. That night, Lena didn't sleep. She stared at the device for hours. Her mind ran in circles. What if it worked? What if it failed? What if she tried and felt nothing again? But in the quiet of her room, when the lights dimmed and the world outside faded, one thought rose above. The rest, not about walking, not about fame, not even about freedom. It was the thought that someone still saw her, still believed she was worth the effort. And that thought, small and fragile, was enough to let hope breathe again. The next morning, she sent a message to the front desk. It had only 3 words. Tell him yes. The spark of hope mark returned to the center 2 days later, just as the sun was rising over the steel hills. The air outside was cool and thin, and the lights from the nearby docking platform flickered in the way the morning haze. Inside the building, everything was quiet as usual. Nurses moved silently between rooms. Machines hummed gently in the background. But one room felt different today. It held a spark now. A small silent flame waiting to be fed. Lena sat upright in her chair, her eyes focused and her hands resting on her lap. The strange device Mark had left behind sat on the table next to her, like a piece of another world. It had not moved since he left, but her mind had not stopped thinking about it. She had spent the last 2 nights going over every memory, every failed promise, every time someone offered help only to walk away. Yet something about Mark felt different. He had not offered her dreams. He had offered her a chance. Mark stepped into the room and gave her a small nod. She nodded back. No words were needed. Her answer had already been sent. Tell him yes. That was all he needed. He placed his bag down and began unpacking the rest of the exo-legs. The full system was light and compact. 2 sleek braces for her legs, a slim waist unit with connection ports, and a small pad for neural interface. Everything looked clean and simple, but Lena knew it held years of work behind its quiet surface. Mark explained the process as he worked, but his voice remained calm, never rushed, never pushing. He said the system worked best when connected directly to her lower spine and leg nerves. The signals from her brain would be read-enhanced and passed to the legs almost instantly. No cutting, no replacing, just linking. He asked her again if she wanted to continue. She looked at the gear, then at her legs, then at him. She said she was ready. The setup took an hour. Mark cleaned the skin around her lower back and placed the neural pad carefully. It attached without pain, but a deep warmth began to spread from the contact point. He then fitted the braces around her legs, gently adjusting the straps and checking each part. The machines beeped softly as connections formed, and the light on. The core began to glow brighter. Lena felt a strange tingling in her legs. Not pain, not movement, just a signal. Her nerves were waking up after 10 long years of silence. Her eyes widened. She gripped the arms of the chair. Mark asked her to breathe slowly. He began the first calibration. The system read her thoughts and converted them into motion commands. Her left leg twitched, then her right. She gasped. Mark smiled but said nothing. The next phase was harder. He asked her to try lifting one leg slightly. It felt like pushing through thick fog. Her brain screamed at the nerves, but they responded like slow echoes. Still the leg moved. Just a few inches, but it moved. Lena let out a breath. She did not know she had been holding. Her hand covered her mouth and her eyes burned, but no tears came. Not yet. They took a break. Mark gave her water and checked the system for any strain. Everything was stable. He said the signals were getting stronger. Her body was adapting. He told her they could stop for the day and continue tomorrow. She shook her head. She said she wanted to keep going. The second attempt was better. Her muscles remembered more than she thought. With support from the exo-legs, she could lift both legs slightly, then press them down again. It felt strange, like wearing shoes made of light and steel. Her balance was off and her breathing heavy, but each moment brought more strength. Mark guided her slowly, helped her place her hands on the handles near the chair. He asked her to try standing. Lena froze. The thought of standing filled her with fear. What if she fell? What if it hurt? What if the legs stopped working? She looked at Mark. He said nothing. He just waited. She closed her eyes. Counted to 3. Pushed. The first second felt like floating. Her body rose slowly as the exo-legs adjusted to her weight and shifted to support her. Her knees trembled. Her back ached, but she was standing. Not in a simulation, not in a dream. She was standing in her own room with her own strength. 10 years of sitting had ended in one step of courage. Her hands shook. Her breathing grew faster, but her heart felt light. Mark asked if she was okay. She nodded quickly. A small laugh escaped her lips, not loud but full of something real. She took one tiny step forward, then another. The legs responded like they were part of her. She reached the edge of the bed and turned around slowly. Her legs felt like fire and air all at once. She sat down gently but with control. She looked up at Mark and smiled. She said, "Thank you." Mark looked at her and said it was not just him. It was her too. Her will, her strength, her fight. He said machines could move bodies, but only people could move hearts. The staff gathered near the door. No one said anything at first. Then someone clapped, then another. The sound grew, but Lena barely noticed. She was lost in the moment, in the feeling of blood rushing through her limbs it had not for years, in the sense of being alive again, not just breathing but living. That night, she walked to the window and stood for 10 minutes, watching the cargo ships float above the skies just like before. But now something had changed. She was no longer watching from below. She was standing with them, ready to rise, ready to begin again. And somewhere deep in her heart, hope had found a place to stay. Waking the body, the next morning arrived with a soft blue glow creeping through the windows. Lena had barely slept. Her body ached in places she had forgotten existed. Her legs felt heavy as if they had carried mountains the day before, but beneath the pain lived something stronger than exhaustion. A quiet determination had taken root inside her. For the first time in years, she looked forward to morning. She was no longer just a watcher. She was becoming part of the world again. Mark arrived early as promised. He brought more tools and a small device to monitor her neural activity. He asked how she felt. She replied with a smile and a single word: alive. They began again. This time the warm-up was quicker. Her body was already adjusting to the strange but incredible machine that attached to her spine and legs. The braces moved with her like they were reading her mind. Mark said they were not perfect yet, still learning. But they were getting faster. Each minute, like a conversation between machine and human growing deeper with every breath. Lena stood up without assistance this time, slowly but steady. Her balance wavered, but she corrected herself with a soft shift in her feet. Mark watched, carefully ready to catch her if needed, but she waved him off gently. She wanted to try alone. She wanted to feel the strength was hers. The center staff gathered again. Not out of duty but curiosity. They had known her for years. They had pushed her chair through gardens, brought her meals, watched her eyes lose their light over time. Now they watched something else. A rebirth. A quiet miracle wrapped in steel and skin. Mark set up a short walking path using floor markers. Just 5 steps forward and back. Lena stared at the path like it was a mountain. Her hands tightened. Her breath slowed. She took the first step. It felt like walking through water thick and unfamiliar. Her legs responded, but her muscles cried out in protest. The second step came slower but stronger. By the third, her arms started to relax. She was no longer forcing the movement. She was guiding it. The fourth step brought a sharp memory. Her first fall during training back in her academy. Days. She had bruised her shoulder but laughed like a child. That laugh echoed somewhere inside her now. The fifth step landed and she stood tall. Sweat clung to her face. Her heart raced, but she was standing at the end of the path. She turned around. Mark raised his thumb. She smiled and took a deep breath. Then walked back. By afternoon, she was walking across the hallway without the support handles. Each step was slow and careful but full of purpose. Other patients peeked from their rooms, some with surprise, some with tears in their eyes. One elderly man whispered that he never thought he would see her walk again. A nurse quietly took a photo, then put her hand over her mouth to stop from crying. Lena returned to her room and sat by the window once more. The world outside looked different now. The ships were still flying, the trees still moved with the breeze, but everything felt closer. As if she was no longer behind a glass wall. She placed her hand on her leg, felt the soft hum of the machine, and whispered thank you. Mark sat beside her. He explained the next steps. With more training, she could walk longer distances, climb small stairs, maybe even run. He said the exo legs were designed to grow with her needs. As her muscles got stronger, the machine would give more control. Lena asked how he built it. He paused for a moment, looked at the sky, then said he had a sister once. She was lost during a planetary attack. Her body was damaged, and no one could save her. That was when he started building. Lena listened without speaking. She understood. The pain of losing something no one else could replace. She reached out, placed her hand on his and nodded. No words were needed. Training continued for days. Each morning she pushed harder, walked farther, climbed low ramps, turned corners, walked backward, learned balance all over again. Her body screamed, sometimes begged her to stop, but her will kept moving. Mark adjusted the suit with every session, making it smoother, lighter, more responsive. One evening, after a long session, Lena stood in the common area facing a full-length mirror. She had not looked at herself properly in years. What she saw now surprised her. A woman standing tall, sweat on her brow, strength in her eyes, and steel on her legs. But most of all, she saw life. The next morning she asked Mark if she could go outside the building, just for a short walk beyond the garden. He looked at her unsure. The terrain was uneven, and there were no support bars. She said she wanted to. Try, he agreed. They walked together past the gardens, past the synthetic trees, and toward the edge of the colony fence. The ground was dry and scattered with loose stone. Lena moved with care, her eyes on each step, but her smile growing with each foot forward. She reached the fence and turned to see the center behind her. The building that had once been her world now stood small in the distance. Mark handed her a small flag from his bag. It was white with a simple blue symbol that meant healing. She planted it in the ground next to her and stood silently. A breeze passed through her hair. For the first time in 10 years, she felt taller than the world. That night she didn't use the wheelchair. She walked slowly to her bed. Her hands touched the wall only once for support. She lay down with tired limbs and a calm heart. Her dreams were filled with footsteps echoing through space. The body had begun to wake, but it was the spirit that truly rose. And now there was no turning back. The world reacts. The news of Lena's first public walk spread faster than anyone expected. A staff member had recorded a short clip without her knowledge. In the video, she stood near the colony fence holding the healing flag, the wind moving her hair as she took steady steps across the open ground. Her face showed focus and strength, but it was her eyes that held the viewers. Eyes that had seen years of silence and still carried fire. The video went viral within hours across networks. People began talking. Who was she? How did this happen? What kind of machine was she wearing? Some called it fake, others called it a miracle. Experts started analyzing every frame of the clip, trying to understand the technology behind the exolegs. Medical forums lit up with questions. Could this help others? Was it safe? Was it legal? Lena sat in her room watching the world discover her story. She was not used to attention anymore. She had become a quiet part of the background for so long that hearing her name on public screens felt strange. Mark stood beside her, expression unreadable as messages from journalists, researchers, and government units poured into his inbox. He read a few aloud. Some offered money, others wanted patents. A few demanded that he hand over the device for inspection. One large company, the same one that once rejected Lena's medical request, now claimed they had inspired the tech. They invited Mark to partner with them, promising global distribution and credit. Mark said nothing at first. He placed the messages into a folder and closed the screen. Later that night, Lena asked him what he planned to do. His answer was clear. He did not build the legs to sell them. He built them because no one else would. Because one life saved mattered, even if no one saw it. Lena looked at him with respect. She said she did not want to be anyone's product. He agreed. Still, the pressure grew. Drones began flying over the center. Reporters camped outside the colony gates. Patients inside whispered, and staff became nervous. The calm place that once held only routine now echoed with noise. One morning, Lena walked into the common area and saw her photo on a large screen. A headline called her the woman who walked through pain. Another called her the spark of change. She turned away, unable to read more. Mark requested a public forum to share the truth. The colony agreed. They set up a simple stage outside under the sky. Chairs were placed in neat rows, and a few banners hung nearby. Nothing fancy, nothing loud. Just space to speak. On the day of the event, the sky was clear. People from nearby colonies arrived. Some in hoverpods, others in old crawlers. They came carrying questions, hopes, doubts. Lena stood backstage, her heart beating fast. She wore the exo-legs proudly, no long dress to hide them. She wanted the world to see her truth. When her name was called, she stepped forward slowly, carefully. But without fear. The crowd fell silent. Cameras turned. Lights blinked. She stood at the center and looked around. She did not give a speech filled with fancy words. She spoke simply about the years she spent in silence, the battles she fought. Alone, the rejection she faced. She told them about the man who came not with promises but with purpose. She said the machine helped her walk, but it was the kindness behind it that truly lifted her. She paused, then looked at the cameras. She said this machine should not be owned by the rich, should not be hidden behind labs or locked in secret projects. She said there were thousands like her across planets waiting for a chance to stand again. She said the future should be shared, not sold. The crowd clapped. Some stood. A child with crutches near the front wiped his eyes. Mark stepped forward after her. He answered technical questions with care. He offered to share the design under open access for medical use only. No weapons, no corporate control. Just help where help was needed. The companies were not pleased. Threats came. Legal notices arrived. Accusations were thrown. But the public stood with them. Other engineers joined the cause. Doctors volunteered to test the system. Within weeks, the design was downloaded across dozens of colonies. Lena became more than a story. She became a symbol. People sent her messages from mining camps, broken cities, war-torn zones. They said her steps gave them hope. Her silence had turned into a voice that reached stars. Back at the center, things calmed again. The visitors left, the lights dimmed, the peace returned. But Lena was no longer just a patient. She was a guide now, a teacher, a force. One evening, she walked to the far edge of the colony alone. She stood on a small hill watching the distant mountains turn gold with the setting sun. Mark joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. They sat together. Watching the sky, she asked if he ever thought it would grow this big. He smiled and said he only wanted to help one person. She looked at him and said, "You helped the whole world instead." He laughed gently, then said maybe the world just needed someone to remind it what humans could still do that night as stars filled the sky. Lena stood once more and took a deep breath. The wind touched her face and the ground beneath her feet felt firm and kind. She had walked through darkness paying doubt. Now she walked for others, and she was not done yet. Steps forward. The morning air was calm as Lena stepped outside the center gates once again. This time there were no reporters, no flashing drones, no whispers following her. She walked without pressure, without fear, and without looking back. Her steps were steady, her movements smooth, her heart light. The center had changed since the early days. Now it had grown into something larger, more alive than before. There were training rooms filled with laughter and determination. Quiet halls where people learned to stand again, gardens where children walked for the first time holding hands with teachers who once thought they would never stand at all. Mark had moved his small lab into a corner of the center, not to make things bigger, but to stay closer to the ones he built for. Every morning he woke before sunrise, checked updates on progress, answered messages from distant colonies, and adjusted designs based on each person's needs. He believed in quiet work and meaningful impact, not in numbers or fame. Lena spent her days with the patients, not behind glass, not behind a title, but beside them. She held their hands, helped them rise, walked with them when they were afraid, and reminded them with each word that they were not alone. Her story was no longer just hers. It had become a shared journey filled with voices, steps, and silent triumphs. One day, a girl named Rhea arrived with her father. She had lost her legs during a reactor leak. The damage was deep, the doctors had said. Recovery was unlikely. Rhea barely spoke, barely looked at anyone. She sat by the wall each day, eyes on the floor, refusing help. Lena approached slowly, sat beside her without speaking. For many days they sat together in silence, just breathing, sharing space, not words. Then one morning Lena offered her a brush and a board and asked her to paint what she felt. Rhea painted a broken sky and a girl with no feet. Then she painted a silver path rising toward the stars. Lena smiled and said that was the first step. Mark worked through the night building braces small enough for Rhea, adjusting every angle, testing every movement, making sure it would carry her dreams, not just her weight. When Rhea wore them for the first time, her hands trembled, but Lena stood beside her, holding her steady, whispering, "You can." Rhea walked 6 steps that day, each one shaky, each one powerful. Her father cried without a sound. Mark watched from the corner, his hands still covered in grease, his eyes full of peace across the galaxy. More centers like Step 1 were opening. People from forgotten sectors, from war-damaged stations, from deep mining colonies, sent their thanks not in words, but in clips showing movement, progress, laughter, life. Every face carried a piece of Lena's story. Every leg built was a piece of Mark's heart. Made real. Governments began adopting the designs into public health plans. Transport ships carried supplies to broken zones, where medicine had never reached before. Engineers on remote moons used local scrap to build copies of the exolegs, teaching others how to make them better, safer, lighter. The design had no lock, no ownership, just purpose. Lena and Mark received hundreds of requests each week, asking for training, for advice, for support. They answered each one personally, even if it took long, even if it meant working late into the night. They believed no message should go unseen, no life left behind. On the 2nd anniversary of Lena's first walk, the colony held a gathering at the hill where she had first planted the healing flag. The flag still stood, worn by wind and sun, but strong. Around it people gathered, patients, healers, builders, families. They brought flowers, stones, drawings, anything that told their journey. Lena stood before them, dressed in simple clothes, her legs gleaming in the golden light, her voice calm yet strong. She spoke not as a hero, but as a human who once felt forgotten. She told them this was not her story, it was theirs, all of them. She said walking was never just about movement, it was about choice, about freedom, about standing for something, even when it felt impossible. Mark stood beside her holding a small girl in his arms, who had walked for the first time just an hour ago. He said nothing, but his eyes held stories that words could never carry. That night, as stars covered the sky and the crowd slowly faded, Lena remained on the hill. She looked up at the flag, then at the stars, then at her feet. The journey had begun. From pain, but it had not ended in it. It had grown beyond borders, beyond names, beyond limits. Mark walked over, sat beside her in the grass, his coat covered in dust, his hands resting in silence. She asked him what he saw in the future. He said more walking, more flying, more giving. She smiled and said maybe one day people will forget we ever needed machines to stand, because we built a world where no one ever had to fall. Mark nodded and said maybe, but until then we walk. She looked at the lights of the center glowing behind the trees, then at the horizon where new centers were already rising in other lands, other skies, other hearts. And then without a word she stood, took a slow deep breath, and began walking forward through the soft grass, through the quiet night, through the endless promise of what still could bait. Story did not end with her walking again. It began when she chose never to stop. The end.